Hi, Colleen. Thank you so much for sending these in. I'm sorry it was such a struggle. I am like constantly, endlessly wrestling with computer related issues, and I know how frustrating it can be. All right, so first, I just want to say, like, on first glance, looking at your photos, I'm very excited about these because I can see that you've got something. You've got some sort of natural eye or talent toward this. And so from this point on, you're basically just going to be building and getting better. So I am looking at your photos here in a program called Lightroom, and this is where I deal with editing my photos. And don't worry if you don't want to be worrying about editing your photos right now. Some people love to just get out there and take tons of pictures. You may never decide to edit your photos. Some people just couldn't they could care less about editing, and that's totally fine. However, I would say probably the majority of serious photographers do edit their photos. When I say serious, I just mean people who like really love photography, who take lots of pictures. And it's because editing allows you to do some fine tuning of your photos. But the cool thing is you could just spend the next 2 years taking tons of pictures and then go ahead and start editing them 2 years down the road. There's no reason that you have to start doing it now. In fact, I would kind of recommend focusing a little bit more on your photography and then start thinking about editing later on down the road. So I will give you some feedback here. If it looks like something went wrong, I'll look at your camera settings. I'll show you how I know what your camera settings are, and I'll sort of let you know what might have gone wrong. I mean, generally speaking, I'm just seeing a lot of beautiful stuff here. I will give you some tips on how you could perhaps improve this photo. I noticed that in some of them, you've given me two photos that are fairly similar with just a little bit of a difference. So I'll point out the one that I think is better and why. And yeah, we'll see how it goes. So first of all, looking at these two pictures here of the trees, I think that I like the second picture best. And the reason it's standing out to me is, on the one hand, the first picture, you are cropped in fairly tight and you're cutting off the benches here. So anytime there is something near the edge of your photo, it's sort of like the eye eventually ends up landing there. And it feels a little bit awkward because it's like, well, I can tell there's a bench, but it's oddly cut off. And it's like my mind is trying to fill in the blank and complete the picture. And so in the second photo, you don't really cut anything off. However, I would say the second photo is sort of like zoomed out a little too far. You could have, so basically it's like if you could split the difference and go somewhere in between these two photos. So this is where, if you're going to learn to edit your photos, cropping is one of the biggest things you can do to put the finishing touches on your photo. And I would say you've got this little bit of tree at the edge there. So if you were to crop the photo something like this, roughly like, oh, okay. So my screen has a crack in it and it's not letting me draw everywhere. So let's just go in and actually crop this photo. So I would bring it in something like that. However, I would love to get it in a little more. So I'm going to crop it again, but this time I'm going to change the aspect to an 8x10, and you can see how that is a little bit more narrow of a photo. And actually, I think this could potentially make for a nice 8x10 print. So if you did something like this, notice how, let me compare the two pictures again. Notice how nothing is really getting cut off in this photo. There's kind of nothing at the edges. I mean, yes, the grass and the tree line is getting cut off. Something's going to get cut off. but these extra little props, these extra little things in your photo are not getting cut off. And actually, you could maybe potentially even make this a square photo. So if you have an Instagram account, this actually I think looks fairly nice as a square image like that. Like, it looks nice and balanced, and there's lots of room in the photo for the eye to roam around the edges with nothing really getting cut off. So excellent picture. And then the finishing touches would just be give it a little bit of a crop. I would say between these two photos, I think, I'm not sure why you took the second shot, but if you thought to yourself, I wonder if in the first one I zoomed in a little too much, or things are a little bit too cut off, if you had any kind of thought process like that, you were on the right track. And if not, well, hey, there's my advice, and you can take it or leave it. And on that note, whatever advice I give you, I mean, I'm just trying to give you more ideas to work with. You don't have to follow what I say as if it's a rule that you must obey. These are just, general principles that I'm working with, and you're going to decide ultimately what you want to do. Okay, for this shot here, it's, so I can see what's going on, that the kids are throwing the leaves. However, it's actually hard to see the leaves because of everything that's going on in the background. So when you're doing something like this, try and find let's say, a less busy background, and particularly one where there is some contrast. So like the child who's throwing leaves in the air, those leaves are sort of blending in with the building and the other colored trees in the background. So if there was like a wall of evergreen trees, then the leaves that are being thrown, because they're orange, would kind of pop out against that green, the dark evergreen background. Or if it was just sky in the background or something like that, but somewhat of a less busy background so that the leaves actually stand out. And then the other recommendation here would be that you shoot on burst mode. So if you can figure out how to change that with your camera, so that instead of taking one picture at a time, you just hold the shutter button down and it'll take, maybe 5 frames per second or something. Because it's very difficult to capture people moving at just the right point. And so this might be, if the leaves kind of stood out a little bit more and it was easier to see, this might be the perfect moment. However, it's hard to tell. Like, the second child hasn't even thrown the leaves yet. So now, whenever I take pictures of, like, let's say siblings throwing leaves, it's notoriously difficult to get them to throw the leaves at the same time. So I'll usually do a countdown, like, all right, get ready, 3, 2, 1, throw. And then I'll be on burst mode, click, click, click. I might take 15 shots or something. And, I kind of shoot right through. I try and get the anticipation on their face before they even throw the leaves. I try and get a couple of great shots where their arms are extended and leaves are floating through the air. And then, if possible, I will get the laughter or something like that afterwards. So if you can end up with 2 or 3 shots, that's great. But yes, biggest tip would be try and find a background where these leaves are going to stand out a little bit more when they're in the air. This is a beautiful scene. Now, when I look at these two, you changed your composition a little bit. Again, I think I like this second shot better. And I'll tell you why. Because there's a bit of a frame within a frame here. So eventually my eye goes down to this little island. And it's interesting how there's basically a big frame around it. My pen sort of ran out there. But we're creating a landscape frame around this little island. And then also there's I love the way part of the landscape falls into deep shadow and part of it is lit by the sun. That's an effect that's being created by these big puffy clouds. And I think it's really neat and it's really beautiful. And I would say your exposure, so your composition is pretty good in this shot. I would say, if possible, if you even could have been a little bit, let me see here. Okay, yes. So I think, well, it depends what lens. Okay, I believe you are shooting with your telephoto lens that goes from 55 millimeters to 200. I think that's the lens you're using. And so you're probably at your widest right now, and you couldn't have shot any wider, so that's okay. I think it would be nice if you got a little bit more of the foreground down here into the shot. Let us see that just a little bit more. So a little wee bit less sky and just a little bit more color down there to kind of complete the frame. Now I'm nitpicking because you started off with a really interesting photo, a great shot, and now I'm just saying, like, what are the little details that might make this better? So if you had angled the camera down just a tiny bit more, I think that would be perfect. And now in terms of your exposure, this shot over here, I would say feels a little bit too bright. Like the sky feels a little bit too bright. And so maybe you were being intentional. You might have been using your plus minus button, the exposure compensation. Maybe you looked at this photo here. Maybe it was on 0 and you said, oh, that's too bright. And maybe you went to -1 or something and that worked better. I don't know. Maybe the difference in exposure is just a fluke and you didn't do anything. However, I'd say this picture here seems a little bit too bright, at least in the sky. So one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this filter across, and then everything that's inside the area that was just red a second ago, I'm going to magically darken that. And so basically I just dragged a filter across the top of the frame and then told Lightroom to make everything within that filter a little bit darker, but please don't really adjust the rest of the photo, and we can make it even a little bit darker yet. So even if you don't get your photo just perfect in the moment, as long as it's pretty close, you can then do some editing that basically just puts the finishing touches on the photo. And actually, look at how much more blue it brought out in the sky. And now we get a contrast, really nice contrast between the cool blue tones of the sky and the warm tones in the leaves. I am drawn to this photo more though, and I think it's the composition. Okay, this is cool. And on a couple different levels. First of all, we got that nice, bright autumn colors. I love those. And then we have these diagonal lines running through your photo. And the interesting thing, and so I think at our lesson I talked with you about lines and how lines will lead the eye through the photo. So I don't know if you were being intentional about this or not, or if you were just taking what you could get. But the interesting thing about the ski lift is because it's on a line and the line is running diagonally through the photo, it gives context and it makes my mind imagine what the rest of the scene is like. I imagine these ski lifts traveling from the upper right corner down to the bottom left or vice versa, but I imagine these things traveling on those lines. And because it's a diagonal line, I know that these things are moving either up or down. I know you're standing on a hill. I know it's a ski hill. I know it's fall. I know everybody who loves to ski is anticipating the winter and the beginning of the ski season. So look at where my mind went when I saw this picture, this very simple photo. And that's just because, you had a beautiful element in it, the leaves. You had some lines that told my mind to travel through the photo. You got the ski lift. I know what the ski lifts are all about. So there's a whole story here. And this is a really great photo. Definitely a really cool, storytelling kind of photo, even though there's no people in it. Now, if there were people on the ski lift, I would think, what in the world are they doing on a ski lift when there's no snow? So then it would be kind of a strange story. But anyways, you get the gist that once you start to pile on different elements in your photo, that that so much more depth emerges. And this is why I was excited to see your pictures, because I could tell that like you are out there pursuing something a little bit deeper than, just the average picture that people could take. Okay, love this. I love the feeling, like the slope, and it's funny because my mind travels right down that hill and into the water. I almost feel like I'm on a toboggan or something, and I could go right down that hill and then slide right out into the water, which obviously that's not going to happen. There's no snow or anything. But I just, again, my mind travels through the photo. I can tell I'm standing at the top of the hill, and my imagination just flows right down into the lake down there. And I would say my only bit of advice here is take more versions of this shot and play with your composition. Angle your camera down a little bit more so you get a little less sky and a little bit more of the hill. Maybe catch your feet or your toes in the shot, something like that. Or angle up a little higher and get a little less of the foreground, and just play with it and see how different compositions feel. But I think you're starting off with a really great shot. And if I were to edit this, the one thing I would do, the photo feels a little bit crooked, so I would just straighten it out a little bit. I don't know if that's even 100% straight, but it's getting a little bit closer. If I undo it, you can see how it's got a bit of a tilt to it. Maybe something like this gets us closer to level. And if I undo it, you can see it's got a bit of a wonky feel to it. Anyways, just again, a really quick edit that you can do. The next couple shots feel a little bright, a little overexposed. And one thing that's going on is it is a rather dark scene. Like there's a lot of dark water and dark landscape, and your camera naturally wants to brighten that up. So I would say, use your plus minus button, go to -1 or -2. But of course, we can do a little bit of editing. I can darken the overall photo. Of course, then it starts to feel like really dark. And so maybe we want to go back and use the filter kind of thing that I used before to help us darken just the sky and not the entire photo, just to bring a little more character out into the clouds. Now, one thing I'm noticing here, let's see. I want to show you so I can see your camera settings, and I just have to move this over so that I can actually write on the screen. But I can see that you are at ISO 400, and of course I did mention to you that when you're outdoors in bright light, that you should definitely start at ISO 400. Go ahead and start there if you're out in bright light. However, if you're starting to get into overcast skies and or evening time, you should start to crank your ISO up a little bit higher, because your camera, because it's a lot darker outside than you think, and when you crank your ISO up higher to 800 or 1600, then it helps your camera to see better in the low light. And I can see your shutter speed setting. Oops, I didn't need to do that. I can see your shutter speed setting over here, and I can tell 1/40th of a second is pretty slow. Now, if you have a steady hand, you're not going to end up with any motion blur from your hand shaking or whatever. But if you do have a shaky hand, then that's a pretty slow shutter speed. So if you crank your ISO up to 800, you will naturally allow your camera to have a better shutter speed, because you're letting your camera see better in the low light, and then that means it can have a quicker shutter speed. It doesn't need to slow down the shutter speed so much in order to let the light in. So now, if I remember correctly, though, you're using a bit older of a camera, and your camera might not look so great. Your pictures might not look so great at higher ISOs. They might turn out to be pretty grainy, and you do have a steady hand. This is nice and sharp. One thing I'm going to do, though, is just try and brighten this up a little bit and see if I can get any grain to show up. Not so bad. I was zooming in way too much there. That's why it looks a little bit grainy. So just know that if you're out in dimmer light, like overcast or evening, you should probably start to go up to 1800 with your ISO and possibly higher to keep a quicker shutter speed. But good news is you do have a nice steady hand, so you don't have to panic too much about that. Okay, again, I would say the sky is somewhat overexposed here. So let's just do our filter magic and see if we can rescue. I feel like the sky is a little too bright. And this is a good sort of case in point about how you can't just rescue any old photo with editing. Editing only works if you've got something good to begin with. So it's a nice shot. However, the sky was overexposed. And even though I'm darkening the sky, notice how some of the sky is just staying white and is just turning, like, it'll get darker and darker, but there's no more like cloud detail there. Some of the sky is just so completely blown out, overexposed, that there's no way to rescue it and fix it. So just be careful, that your photo doesn't get too bright, because you can't just edit anything. You can't rescue anything necessarily. So it would have been good if you'd gone a little darker on this photo. Of course, if you went a little darker on this photo, then the trees would get darker. So it's like, oh man, there's always this trade-off. Now, you are shooting into a tricky scene here because the foreground, the water and the trees are fairly dark. It's like you're standing on the shady side of these things. And the sky is very bright, and it's very difficult for your camera to capture the proper exposure and detail in the really bright sky and in the really dark trees. So you kind of have to split the difference, and it's like you're going to fiddle around with your plus minus until you feel like you get the photo like, well, the sky's bright, but it's not too bright. It's not way overexposed. And the shadows are kind of dark, but I can work with them. And then you come along in Lightroom and you do your best to, darken those highlights a little bit and brighten the shadows up a little bit. Notice how when I use this shadow slider, it's really just improving the darker areas of the photo. So when you get a photo that is both a little too bright in some places and a little too dark in others, you can usually balance it out. And let's just make sure. My computer is running a little bit slow here. Okay, anyways, you get the gist of that. Same principle here. Sky's a little too bright, but I think we could edit this. We could rescue this. Almost certainly we can get a little more detail back in the sky. And this photo is not so extreme as the last one. That's why we're able to fix this. So we get at least a bit of the detail back in the sky, something like that. And compositionally, I like this picture, and I like its wider angle, and I really appreciate how I almost feel like I'm standing there in the water. Like I might be standing there in the water up to my waist or something. It's really cool how you can see the clouds reflecting in the water. So I do notice your shutter speed getting pretty slow. It's at 120, or sorry, a 25th of a second. That's quite slow. Anything under 100th of a second is getting pretty slow. So again, crank your ISO up a little bit higher and you will get a quicker, naturally just get a quicker shutter speed. This is really cool. This perspective is really interesting. And I mean, at first I almost wanted to say like, it might have been better if there was a little bit less. I'm assuming this is a dock you're standing on. However, no, it's probably like perfect like this. Now just play around with your perspective a little bit. If you'd gone with a little bit higher angle so that we could see out to the water just a little bit, see out to the trees and the water just a little bit so that we get a bit more context. But otherwise, really, really cool shot. So it's like just play around with it a little bit more. But again, we've got these leading lines that that lead right out to the middle of the photo, and it's like, it's like we're about to run and jump off the dock or something. So, and this is the kind of thing that lets me see, like, when you're playing around with stuff like this, I know that you're going to do so well with photography. Like, you've got an eye, you get out there, you experiment, you're not making any tragically major mistakes. For the first batch of photos you sent me, this is great, and you only get better from here. This is beautiful, the water droplets on the leaf, and this leaf stands out because it is a lighter colored leaf on top of darker colored leaves on top of dark green grass. So it's really neat how it stands out. You would probably have a lot of fun with a macro lens that allows you to take extreme close-ups, because you can get some absolutely incredible shots of water droplets and things like that. So you could investigate a macro lens for your camera if you're interested in super close-ups. And we got the puppy dog here. And okay, see, this is a great portrait. The background is out of focus. I see that you're zoomed in to 90 millimeters. Your ISO is great here. You've got a nice quick shutter speed of 1/500th of a second, so that's great. And because you have the telephoto lens on, and because you're standing kind of close to the dog and you've zoomed in at least a little bit, that's what's helping to give you that really nice, blurry, out of focus background. And it's such a great look for portraits. And then this is neat because, okay, you've given me 2 pictures of the dog. One of them is a wider angle shot that shows more of the environment. And the other one is a close-up portrait. And so anytime you can go for this kind of variety, any moment that you're photographing, any landscape, any leaf, anything that you are photographing, challenge yourself to come up with 3 very different looking shots. And it might mean switching out lenses. It might mean just switching your perspective, getting closer, getting further away, higher angle, lower angle, moving left or right to change the way the background looks, all that kind of stuff. Because then you start to sort of, you end up with these natural kind of collections of pictures. Like, most people will show the same scene over and over and over. And it's like, okay, great, you took 5 pictures of the same thing. They all look almost identical. I know to you, I don't know, you felt like taking more pictures, but like to the rest of us, we're getting bored of seeing the same thing over and over. If you're going to show us 3 pictures or 5 pictures of your dog, and they're all unique pictures, we're going to love one picture just as much, or we're going to love the next picture just as much as we loved the one that came before it. And you'll keep us totally engaged and interested in your photos. A lot of people will post multiple photos to Facebook or Instagram, and it's like you're swiping and there's 7 pictures and 4 of them are almost identical. If you can give me 7 unique pictures, that's going to be amazing. And so just take what you've done with the dog here and expand it a little bit more and apply that to everything here. Give me more photos of this leaf from different perspectives. Give me different versions of this dock photo. I love that you have essentially given me this landscape from a couple of different perspectives here. One of them shows more of the scene. One of them is zoomed in a little bit more. And of course, you've even zoomed in and given me like some details of the ski hill. So now you've got at least 3 shots, one of the island in the lake, another shot that shows me, oh, this lake is at the bottom of a ski hill. You got some detailed shots of the ski hill. So you can see there how you're giving me the kind of variety that I crave, or anybody craves, when they're looking at your photos. Same kind of thing with the portrait of the dog here. I can tell even without looking. Actually, I figured you were zoomed in a little bit more, but you're at 55 millimeters. I would say if you make sure that your telephoto lens is on, and next time you do a picture of grass like this, zoom like all the way into 200 and experiment with that and see how it works. You'll end up with a little tighter shot. And I might also recommend that you shoot this kind of thing vertically, because the grain of grass, or the blade of grass, the grain head, whatever we want to call it, is a long, tall object. So it kind of feels like shooting vertical is maybe the natural way to get it, unless you had several of these in a row stretching across the frame horizontally. And it kind of cuts out, to me, this is a more powerful version of that photo. It brings me right in to that, to the head on the grass. And I even feel like I look at the background a little bit more on this version of the photo, and it's contrasted against the nice colorful background. So again, a very simple crop, in my opinion, made your photo even stronger. And like I said before, it's up to you whether you feel that way or not. I might even crop it in a little bit tighter and see, like, if we were to get rid of some of that other stuff, I almost think I like this even better now. But that's up to you. And again, it's just a quick little crop that makes, yeah, I think looking at your photo like this, I think it looks way more powerful. Again, just my opinion. You are free to think whatever you like. Again, this is one of the things I love about what you're doing. You give me these completely different perspectives. So this is really neat here. Now, this picture here, I would say, is overexposed. I feel like those leaves are really bright. So this would be a situation where if you were at +1 or 2 or something like that, just go back to 0. If you were at 0, maybe you need to go to -1 or -2 to make it a little bit darker. Of course, we can darken it a little bit with our slider here. And I just feel like it takes the edge off of the brightness. The other thing we can do is just bring down the highlights a little bit. Maybe that wasn't quite enough, but that kind of gets us there. Something like that. It's pretty close. I like the bright contrast. I like the brightness of the photo. It just felt a little overdone. And then I'm bringing down the black slider a little bit just to add a little contrast in the dark parts of the photo. And then I think I'm going to add a little bit of texture here to make that bench kind of pop out. And I like this. I like your composition. I like this stone bench against the colorful background. Yes, I really like this. This is nice. And again, you know, if you like the quick edit that I did, I might even put, oops, that's the wrong one. I might even put a little bit of a subtle vignette around this. The vignette just kind of darkens the edges of your photo a little bit. I like to keep it really subtle. I don't want it to be particularly noticeable, but I feel like it draws us into the photo just a little bit more. You can see there's no vignette, and that's with a vignette. It's so subtle, but I feel like it's one of those tiny little things that might make a positive difference on your photo. I love this, and how the background is out of focus, and yet I can still tell what the background is. I might recommend that you nudge yourself to the right a little bit more, like just changing your perspective a bit to create a little bit of separation between the swing and the ladder. So if you move to your right, even just a foot or so, you would have it separated, and you'd have the two swings dangling in the air. You could still see a bit of the ladder. And I don't know what it is I like about this, but I like it. And it's kind of, oh no, I know what it is. Okay, so here, I thought it was a little bit weird because, like, well, it's pictures of swings and nobody's on the swings. Now, I actually like pictures about that. And I'm trying to think, like, I don't know, why? Like, wouldn't it be better to have people playing on the swings? Why do I like this? And I think what's neat about it is, again, it's autumn. And it's a time of year when people start to spend a little less time outside, a little less time on the playground, and we're all bracing ourselves for winter. And so the fact that these swings are empty kind of makes perfect sense. And I like the way that the yellow pops against the green. Again, just a little more separation between the swing and the ladder would be great. I think it would pretty much perfect your photo. And again, take 2 or 3 completely different shots and see if you can create an interesting little collection. And the same would go for these, I'm drawing a blank on what you call these. I'll just call them tiles. or shingles. I know this is probably siding. So I love this. Take more pictures of this. Take pictures from straight on, take them from the side like you just did. Get in as close as you possibly can to them. I know you can't necessarily get a macro shot, but you could probably get in a little bit closer and just have fun and play with this, because this is really cool. So show me more of this. You could easily triple the number of photos that you've given me here just by taking a couple more shots, a couple more variations, and you are really going to grow as a photographer. You're going to like double or triple or 10 times your skills as a photographer just by challenging yourself to take 2 or 3 more shots of every scene. Even if you don't like the photos, just challenging yourself to stay in the moment for 1 more minute and hunt will really expand your skills. This is beautiful. Just perfect time of day. Your ISO is fine here, even though it's probably getting a little more dim outside because your shutter speed is still quick enough. I wish I could see the silhouette of the tree a little bit more. It kind of gets cut off in the middle. I would love for you to have played with this scene. Go ahead and give me this shot, but then start to turn yourself toward that tree and get like a vertical shot. Like I'll crop it here. And if you had angled a little bit more to the right, you could have got this tree like centered or whatever. And I think that that would be really neat. So again, just work the scene a little bit more because you've got something beautiful and you started with something great to begin with. We could perhaps darken the highlights just a little bit to give us a little more character in there. And this sunset is just absolutely amazing. The silhouettes here. So between the 2 shots, I think this is the better one because you've left a little bit more of that silhouette frame at the bottom. So if you were, now this looks like the shot you took first, and then the sun is sinking a little bit more. So I would say, you know, if you had got a little bit more of the frame in the bottom, this shot would be like perfect. Really neat. Really just awesome. Amazing photo. I want you to print your photos and hang them in your house. You have some great stuff. And you don't necessarily have to print these ones, but I really want to see your photos. I don't know if you already print your photos or make photo books or anything, but you need to put your photos into the real world and let them inspire you to get back out there and keep going. You know, maybe someday you'll be ready for another lesson to kind of level up on some skill that you're trying, but you have definitely, you got what it takes, and just keep getting out there. And whenever I'm doing a photography get-together or, you know, a workshop or something, I would love for you to come out. They typically, these group things are either free or they're very low cost. And at some point, I want you to contribute and show people your photos because you will inspire other people to get their butts out there. A lot of people have cameras that they don't use, as you know. And man, when you get out there, like, wow, you, Colleen, have got like some skill that you need to build on here because this is great stuff. So thank you so much. And yes, I am looking so forward to seeing more from you.